Well, hey guys, another episode of Digging Deeper. Robert here with the one, the only Anthony Hall.
Oh man, this is a dangerous duo to put on camera.
It is. I think that when I said your last name too, it like rolled an R or something.
Yeah, you said har.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah. So, we shared last week, we kicked off a series called Fear Not. And I would love to talk with you about it.
Oh man, I love it. If you weren't there Sunday, go watch the message online. You need to see it. And not only that, but I want to open today kind of the way we opened Sunday, or the way you opened Sunday.
Okay.
Magic Edit.
Magic Edit, man. So you kind of showed me this, and then we went on a research, is what we're calling it, and it's some important ministry function research.
Yeah. Deep dive into a ministry system called Canva.
Yes.
Which, if you know what Canva is, then you're probably in the same category as Robert and I. If it's just a resource where you basically can build graphics at a lot. It's like simple. Like you just attach something. It's just one click versus having to do it all from scratch like some of the other platforms.
This is not a commercial for Canva.
We're not sponsored by Canva. but I opened Canva one day to do an Instagram post for our youth ministry. If you don't know, I'm the youth pastor here. And when I opened it, it immediately pulled up and it was like, try Magic Edit. So immediately I go, Robert, I'm like, come here. And he comes in and we start kind of messing around on it. And what you do is you take pictures and you upload them, and then you highlight a portion of them, and you can type in anything, and it'll transform them.
It's freaky. Is it what it is?
It is.
Like, speaking of fear not, like that's why I open with it, because I'm like, AI is getting scary to the point where you can't trust anything you see, because it's so easy to edit everything around you to be anything you want. And
especially when like Pete looks just so natural in a wizard's robe. You know what I mean? It's hard to trust that picture is not from like a Comic-Con.
I thought he looked natural in all those things, right? But especially the king outfit. That was very fitting for him. True. So I especially like the version of him that was just like more handsome, stronger. That was the best.
I think it's great. And it also is true that it makes it hard to trust things.
Yeah,
and as funny as it was, as great as it was to kind of mess around on that, I feel like for me, when you said that, immediately I didn't even have a question to me that's like, that's not true, or I didn't feel defensive in any way. I was immediately like, yeah, you're right. Yeah. It is hard to trust things.
It is hard to trust what you see.
And I started to think about how much time it took me and you to figure out how Magic Edit worked. And then I think about like the kids now, and I'm like, they probably pick it up like that.
So fast.
And they're probably using it like we are, we get there and two goofballs, we're like, how can we make Pete a wizard, right? But other people get on there and I'm like, what are people doing on this? Like,
I don't know.
Blemishes, what things are they covering up to, kind of portray a different version of themselves? And
absolutely.
So it just kind of stirs this question in me, like, when it comes to just where we're at today in the world, and that could be AI, but what do you think is one of the biggest, like, kind of things that stirs the inability to trust? You know what I mean? Like, it takes away our opportunity, or really just our window for trust in people, or at least for you, like for Robert, what makes it hard to trust? You don't have to name drop people, obviously, but like reasons, that you wouldn't trust.
Honestly,
someone.
It's usually like, and I don't know if you identify with this, but I'm always wondering, what is someone's agenda behind the words that they are saying? And we're in this era where, and I guess that kind of goes into the message even yesterday of, being worried about what people think. But I also do feel that tension all the time, where if someone says something or portrays one way, then you start to ask the underlying question of, what is the motivation? What is the agenda? Like, are they trying to gain a leverage, or are they trying to get something, to advance themselves, or what does it look like? And that's where it kind of gets really hard to trust. Are they trying to sell something, right? It seems like in this era, there's like, someone's always trying to sell you something. Like, financial freedom these days looks like multi-level marketing, and it's something where you turn your relationships, and I know a lot of people that are that have businesses with multi-level marketing or some kind of coaching or something like that do a really good job of kind of having it available, but not making it their leading motivation and agenda in every conversation. But I know that you have probably encountered people that are not good at it. And they literally, like, you thought you were friends, and you realize, I'm not your friend, I'm just your customer all the time. And that makes it hard, I think, sometimes to trust people.
Yeah.
It also is hard to trust people when you've already been deceived, not necessarily even by that person. And I see that happening a lot, and a lot of consequences that our society and our culture is facing, because a lot of people feel wildly deceived by so many different things. People will post conspiracy theories, or things that maybe aren't even conspiracy theories, but they almost sound like them. And it seems like so many people are finding ways to highlight the ways that they have been deceived, and then they incorporate that into every relationship and interaction that they have with everybody else. They're almost going into a conversation or into a relationship with the expectation that there's some kind of deception that's going to happen.
Yeah,
and
that's so
that
true.
creates a fragmented foundation of trust, I think, culture-wide, that that really kind of creates barriers to real, genuine relationship, which is why there's such a value on authentic relationships these days, because there's a scarcity.
Yeah.
And so you hear that all the time. Like, I want real, lasting community. I want authentic relationships. I want someone to get real with me, and things like that. And the reason why they're even expressing that need is because there is a felt need, a felt tension, because of the scarcity and the experience of so much of that isn't.
And what's crazy is we're meaning culture, I guess. The world is so consumed with that too, that when you do end up in a healthy relationship, or you do have like those healthy friendships that you're looking for, or the healthy community, what I've seen, especially in teenagers, is they're immediately uncomfortable with it because they're not used to it. Because it looks different than everything else they've experienced.
Yeah.
So then it's almost like you got to shake them and be like, this is literally what you wanted. This is what a healthy friendship looks like. Accountability comes with it.
Absolutely.
That type of stuff where they're like just so used to that surface level, what can you give me? What can I get out of it type of relationships, that it's just like now they actually have someone that's willing to go the extra mile, and it feels weird and uncomfortable to them. And they're just missing it in plain sight.
Because we're in a culture shift right now with social media, but it's not just social media, where what you see first is the edited, gone through a filter image that someone puts forward, and then you get to meet the rest of the person afterwards. I mean, have you ever had the experience where, you are introduced by someone or introduced to someone, and you kind of like, you can see like their social media pictures, and then you meet them in person, you're like, whoa, that's not the same person, right? So many filters, so many and I think that we do that not just in social media, but we've learned that behavior of how to almost filter the image that we portray to everybody, because we're trying to actually adjust the image that we put forward to fit the expectations that we think people have for us.
Yeah,
and so if we think that people have an expectation that we are going to be a creative, all of a sudden you've got more kids that are apparently, in your realm, you have a lot of youth, aged people that are really like, they're all artists for some reason, or everyone's an athlete that's apparently going to be getting a full ride scholarship, or everyone is. It seems like,
is true.
And it's like this portrayal that you can put, and we have been given more vehicles than ever to be able to present an image before you even actually meet the person.
It's so true. And what's crazy is what happens is that also diminishes the value of like real recognition. Like when you think about it, like with these kids that go to social media, for example, like talking about teenagers, so many of them are indirectly impacted by what other people say about other people. So like that was one of the things you talked about, is like voices that are leading us, right? And like what I mean by that, I'll kind of break it down because I know that's a bit of a tongue twister.
Yeah.
But like, I don't have to see your Instagram. I'll just use you for example. I don't have to look at a picture you post and go, Robert, what is that? Or Robert, that's a great post.
Yeah.
A lot of times it's indirect. Like they'll hear someone say it to someone else. So I might be like, Pete, that picture that you posted, oh, beautiful, love it, amazing picture. And then what they're doing is, instead of being like, oh, Pete posted a good picture, they're immediately going, I'm doing something wrong because I'm not getting that same recognition.
Like a comparison trap.
I need to do something different. Now I got to do what Pete does.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, you have all these, this whole generation of influencers and people that want to be influencers, but all they do is copycat each other.
Absolutely.
I'm like, influencing is the complete opposite of that.
Because they're so weighted and motivated by
what other people think.
What other people think. And I mean, I think that you're touching on something that I did not talk about in the message, but because I can only talk about so many different things. But a big side product, or a side effect rather, of being over considering of like other people's opinions about you or those connected to you is that you can get stuck in the slavery of comparison.
Yeah.
Right. Where you are constantly comparing yourself to other people. And so you start to have this motivation to try to adjust your life to look more like somebody else's.
That's great.
And it's not even what their life might actually be.
Yeah.
It's just what their life has the image of being.
You did say that in your message.
To an extent, right?
That's true.
But to the point where we will adjust our lives not just based on what the narrative that we're playwriting in our brains about what people are thinking or expecting or what's not going to disappoint them or what's going to get us embraced or accepted by different people, but we're also now like motivated by our comparison and what makes us feel very insecure oftentimes when we look at what someone else is presenting and we look at them and go, wow, that's so much better. I need to get there.
Yeah.
I need to do that. And then we start to, like you say, we just start copying each other.
Yeah.
So now what used to be original,
Yep.
like
It's now
originality is kind of scarce, right? Like everything
sure.
is a copy of something else. You know, it's like we're all trying to be original by being just like everybody else, which isn't anything new, but it's heightened now that there is an overexposure due to social media and just the internet at large.
Yeah. Man, that's great.
We're more interconnected than ever, but more disconnected than ever at the same time.
And I feel like on the topic of comparison, like I feel like I see this a lot with teenagers and with, I would say, peers that are believers and are Christian and I would say even are just constantly trying to pursue Jesus. But there's this kind of mindset almost that like I won't deal with comparison when I'm walking with Jesus, when I'm walking with God or living for God. And first of all, wrong.
Yeah.
Not correct. As great as that might feel to think, it's just not true. And so I'm wondering, like, what do you feel like in kind of the Christian sphere? What are some like areas of comparison that people fall into, like other people's opinions that we maybe lean to too much?
I think it goes from everything to whether or not I should raise my hands during worship to what leadership role should I be in or what way should I be serving?
Yeah.
How much money should I be giving?
Great.
How much church events and mission trips and outreaches should I be attending and a part of? Like it goes all throughout all those things,
Yeah.
right? Like should I look and dress like this preacher over here, or should I, we can even take it to the other extreme of like, I can't dress like that because I don't want people to judge me. And so then all of a sudden, like you start to monitor even what you have and what you are and what you're into based on the opinions of other people or the fear of opinions of other people to the point where you're like, yeah, I really need to get a new car. But if I get a new car, what if they look at it and go, oh, is that where as some people that are on
exactly.
staff, or is that where all our tithe money's going and things like that too? And it's like, I'm not like there is something wrong probably with going and getting a Bentley, but but oftentimes I think that even when you are working in ministry, you get stuck in the trap of being so afraid and frozen by what everyone thinks that you'll actually start to be neglectful of certain things rather than have the freedom to be able just to enjoy some of the provisions that God has given you.
Yeah.
And so I think on all those spectrums that happens. And I mean, I mentioned at the very first part of this that even like whether or not I should raise my hands during worship, like you feel that tension all the time. Like I know that, if you are a Christian that has been in a plethora of different types of churches, that's a great word, plethora. But of different types of churches with different types of expressions, then you have experienced this tension where you go into, let's say maybe a church that's a little bit more traditional. It's a nice way. And so maybe it's a little bit more like kind of quiet, less emotion and passion driven, like
Waiting on the
singing,
hymns.
kind of that deal. Like people don't really raise their hands, they don't really move, kind of stuff.
Yeah. But then like they'll just be stone faced and then at the end they're like amazing worship set and you're like, you enjoyed that?
Yeah,
You're like, wait a minute.
so different expressions, different people. But if you've ever been in an environment like that, like I tend to be a raise your hand and
me too.
belt it out kind of guy.
The charismatic background is definitely not shy of.
Yeah, and so, but I get in an environment like that, and I'm like, I will fold my hands, and like, and even then, you're feeling like the focus is supposed to be on Jesus, and your authentic
You're worried about
relationship
what
with
other
him.
people are thinking of you.
And yet there's a subconscious thing or conscious thing of like, man, nobody else is raising their hands. Everyone's singing pretty quiet, like respectfully, reverently. And there is, I'm not taking away from the value of an environment like that. It's different from the expression that I prefer. However, I also know that there's value in it for other people. So that's great. The only thing is I'm recognizing that there is a social pressure that happens because of the environment you're in.
Yeah.
And we take that to every aspect of our faith, where there's a social pressure and a certain environment to be an evangelist. And so you go into one church and everyone's sharing their faith. Everyone's motivated towards it. And then you get into another environment where it's like, sharing your faith feels like you're selling something, all the time. And so then it's like, no, we never want to do that. And so there becomes a resistance to it. For example, it goes into every avenue of your faith. There's an environment where it's like, man, we read the Bible all the time. Like we're really committed to the Word of God. And so then you're there and you're committed to the Word of God and you place a high value on the Bible. And there's other environments where it's kind of like, no, we just talk about, whatever else. And so then all of a sudden that's not a priority.
Exactly.
Your priorities are oftentimes set by the pressures of the social circles that you're allowing yourself to be in.
That's great.
And so,
and even when it comes to our social circles, I'm going to have you say this so I don't butcher it, but your second point yesterday, tell me what it was again when considering the voices.
Yeah. So in context, I was talking about these different voices that drive us to become who we are becoming. And the first one was a voice of what others think about you.
Yep.
The next one was a voice of what others think about those connected to you.
Yes, the voice of what others think about those connected to you.
Because Joseph, we're talking about Joseph here. Joseph was, the Bible first describes him as a man faithful to the law. Other versions say a just man, a righteous man. Like he has a reputation to uphold, and that's driving him in the beginning. And then it goes towards, oh no, he's worried about Mary. He doesn't want to expose her to public disgrace, is what the Bible says. And so he's driven now and motivated by what people might think about someone connected to him. Whether that is going to affect his reputation and become a liability for the image that he's built. He's a carpenter. He's been working on this thing for a long time. Or if it is even just selfless and it's completely benevolent towards Mary, even so, it's still coming from a place of being afraid of what other people think. But in this case, it's about Mary. And as parents, man, we experience that all the time. Like you probably experience that as a youth pastor. When people are like those rascally, youth kids, those rebellious teenagers, you're kind of, there's probably something in it that goes,
why are they running to grab donut holes? I'm like, because they can still run. None of us can. Like, I'm like, they can still run, so that's why they're running there. I would be running there if
they don't have arthritis. I don't know. That's so good.
two knees intact.
Oh man,
no, it's so true though, because like I was thinking about it though, and I'm like, it's interesting when like you do take it personal, like the opinions that other people have for the people around you. And I don't know, I'm sure you feel this too. I think everyone does, but especially when I first started walking with Jesus, I had so many, everyone in my life before that was, had no church experience, was also not planning on it. And so like there were so many of them that I didn't just cut out and I wanted to keep so close that I felt like so insecure about, honestly, because I was worried about what other people
what your
said
other Christian
and thought
friends
about
might
them.
think if you have these friends.
I get
still.
this new environment now and these Christians that are loving and there for you and all this, and then the second I'm like, they hear a little bit about my story or something and they're like, wow, and then I'm like, yeah, so I still have these friends, and they're like, what? You're still around them? You're still this, and I'm like, wait a minute, what? And like at first the tension is like kind of aggression, like I want to push back on that, but then like over time it wears on you and it becomes like an insecurity, like I said earlier, and you start to kind of worry, like, and you said it in your message, but people have to take the time to put themselves in like Joseph's shoes in this situation. How would you feel if Mary, your wife, who you have not
had sex with,
was pregnant? Like what emotions are you feeling at that level? It's already going to be escalated.
There's so many
obviously.
dynamics and consequences with that.
I know.
Yeah.
And I think so many people hear it, and because it's a story we hear often, it's easy to kind of like brush it off. But even for the people listening, like take a couple minutes and just think about how you would respond emotionally. It is probably not going to be healthy. Like not going to be drawn out, not going to be processed. You're probably going to do a lot of things immediately that aren't the best choice to make.
You'll hear a bunch of voices. And I'm not meaning like in a in like a psychosis type of way. I mean, you'll hear a bunch of motivations and ideas
Yeah.
and worries and anxieties that will start to enter the picture, and then you'll start to play scenarios
Yeah.
out.
Your
At least,
first thought isn't, "Oh God, you blessed me. Thank you. This is incredible."
Sure.
You're immediately in your head. You're going, "What can I do now? What should I do now? What are people going to think of me? What are people going to think of her? What
Absolutely.
And you go on this rabbit trail. And you kind of lose your mind over time. It feels like.
and for Joseph, what he experienced was unprecedented,
Yeah.
right? Like, and I think it's the only time it's ever going to happen. So, and so I mean, like what he was experiencing was something that he had no context or previous precedent for, and I would actually define wisdom that way, and in that way, I actually think Joseph is a very profound picture of what wisdom is, because wisdom can be defined as knowing what to do when there is no precedent, right? Like it might be wise when you are like, okay, I know what to do because I've seen the experience of other people and I learn how to do it too, and you're kind of learning from their wisdom, and there's an experience level to that too. There's a deep set of wisdom when there's no precedent and you don't know what to do, and and you're like, okay, if I try to go my direction or my ways, then I might get in trouble. But then the Bible says, higher are his thoughts and higher are his ways and your ways and my ways. And so then you start to say, I'm going to trust in the Lord with all my heart. I'm not going to lean on my own understanding. That's wisdom. And that's what Joseph portrays in such a powerful way. Because, I mean, he took something that was an unprecedented event, that was a disruption to his identity, a disruption to his image, and a danger for Mary. And that's what he's responding to. And you and I, we face situations not like that, but like that.
Yeah.
All the time, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Or things that disrupt the image or the status quo that we've always had. And sometimes it's really positive, and sometimes it's just terrifying. And we need to hear those words, fear not.
Yeah. And even when you kind of get to that fear not stage, the last thing you talked about was obedience.
Yeah.
Joseph's obedience. And I think especially with teenagers, again, I work with teenagers more than anyone, so I speak to them a lot more. But I see this desire to obey, but it's almost as if they feel like they have to get to a certain spot before they even have the opportunity to.
Explain that. What do you mean?
Like it's I want this relationship with God. I want God to show up in my life. I want to do what's gonna, the things that are gonna glorify Him, and then they can just do it, but to them, there's, because of all these voices in their head, there's something, whether it's what it means to be a Christian publicly, or I don't know what, in their schools or their teams, something there is stopping them from just obeying. Instead, it leaves them in this position of wanting to obey, or they feel like I have to, once I've been in church 5 years, I've been baptized once, rededicated once, I graduate high school, now I'm going to obey God.
I get you saying.
Now when I'm through all the difficult, uncomfortable stuff, I can obey God.
What you're touching on is huge, because obedience, the road to obedience, is going to be filled with obstacles that are created by the world and the things around us that are barriers or discouragements towards obedience to Jesus.
Yeah.
But there's also this construction that we've created, out of a good will, out of a good heart, to create a pathway for people. But people have become so tied to this pathway and this journey that they think they're supposed to have, that they feel like they can't be obedient to this level over here until they've taken these steps over here, and they have all these other steps between, because we've kind of created these pathways for people, and it's necessary. Like, you need to create discipleship pathways for people, but if we are too dogmatic or legalistic about it, then it can breed, actually, and I think this is what you were kind of referring to a little bit, it can breed this mindset of before I can, if God ever called me to be a pastor, I'd have to go to seminary first. That used to be the thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, you have to go to seminary
I
before you
felt
can
that,
do that kind of things,
I
right?
have to have a master's, and
You have to
all these things.
You have to get preparation, and we call it equipping, right? You have to be equipped for the work before you can actually engage in the work, which is not exactly what I see in the New Testament, right? Like, oftentimes I saw equipping happen while engagement in the mission of Christ. Jesus would say, "Follow me," and then on the way, I'm going to make you fishers of men.
Yeah.
Like, follow me. And it's going to take some initial sacrifice and obedience. It's going to, a lot of initial sacrifice and obedience. But then as you go, I will train and equip you for the work of the ministry. And as a matter of fact, Ephesians tells us that the purpose of those that are holding kind of leadership offices in the church, that for you and I who are pastors, our job is not to do the work of the ministry because we are suddenly equipped for it.
Yep.
It is to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. And I believe that actually happens within the context of doing the ministry because there's always a demand for it.
Yeah.
There's always people hurting that need hope and healing. There always is. There's always a necessity for a loving and life-giving church who would bring hope and healing in the name of Jesus. That's always a necessity.
Well, and I think like even like one of the biggest hesitations when it comes to obedience that I see too, and I felt even within my own walk with God, is like I think that throughout all the voices we face that are leading us constantly, and the comparison, it starts to birth this like expectation.
Sure, of what they look like, what they act like, what they talk
when you're
like.
standing there and you're saying, God, I want you to use me. I want you to, I want to obey you. I want you to show up in my life. I want you to be at the front. You might mean it, but when you have an expectation tied to it, you're going to miss what God's doing because it doesn't always look like what he did for, your friend Susie, or what he did for Robert, or what he did for me. Like God works differently for every single person. And so when they go in with this expectation, it limits their opportunity to actually obey because they're missing God in plain sight. It's
good.
Because they're being led by this that comparison, right? That voice of well for them, they got approval, like I'll just say like a quick story for me. Like I remember being in college early on, and this was something I struggled with because I cared so much about the voice of other people around me because I had a lot of great leaders at my college, and a lot of them, probably without even knowing, were doing more harm than good at times because they'd be like, hey, we want to shout out this student. And they'd call a student up and be like, hey, you have just been crushing school.
And
you've been
everyone
leading
else
the kids
want that.
ministry. You're doing amazing.
Yeah.
And so then for me, when I'm like, okay, I want to be better at obeying God right now. I want to be, living the life
Yes.
God wants for me. I don't go, God, do whatever that is and help me be aware of it. No, I go, God, I need to get in kids ministry because that's the only way to get the approval, And like, even though there was a lot of growing I still needed to do at the time, that's what that communicated to me. That's what those voices were saying is like, if I want to succeed, I need to be in Kidsman, and I need to have the good grades, and I need to be in the first person in college to get to the front of the chapel and worship. And it's a lie. Like just because it works for someone else and just because someone else is getting praised for it doesn't mean I'm doing something wrong. Yeah. It doesn't mean that I'm not obeying God. But ultimately, when we tie that expectation to obedience and we expect specific results, we're probably going to miss what God's actually doing.
This is dangerous for me to say, given what I do for a living here and what I do with my life. But in a lot of ways, the stage is one of the worst thing to ever happen to happen to the church, because we have now like defined what church is based on even just a configuration of where we gather, being where everybody is standing and watching a few people up on stage. And I like to say this, we oftentimes have big churches with small platforms, meaning there's only room for a few. And so now you've kind of created this envy culture or this comparison culture or this goal-oriented culture that's all about not necessarily being just obedient to God, but being able to prove your obedience and your faithfulness to God, and that prove that you are at a certain point in your journey by getting up on that stage. Yeah. And until you can get up there, so many people feel like they are overlooked, like they are inadequate, and they will compare themselves. And we have created, full birthed into this thing, this whole celebrity, pastor, worship leader, you fill in the blank culture, where we live our lives spiritually, vicariously, through these images that we see up on stages. And so we see everyone, especially with social media and YouTube and the internet and everything that the globalization of access gives us to information everywhere, we see all these Christians that are like, I have all these favorite pastors. And oftentimes that's great if all these pastors are being used by God to speak into your life, to exhort you or challenge you or convict you closer to what Jesus wants you to be. But oftentimes when people say, I have all these favorite pastors,
I want to be like them,
they're saying, I have all these people that I wish I was like, or that I wish. I remember being in certain places and watching wives elbow their husbands, and point up at the pastor almost as if it was like, you should be more like him, like all frustrated with their husbands as he's talking about the way he is patient with his wife up on stage. And it's like, come on, we've created this little bit of comparison culture through the celebrity culture, but also like this insecurity that happens in people that makes people feel inadequate for the work of the ministry that our very job is to equip them for. And so now we're frustrated because we're like, why doesn't anyone want to engage in the work of the ministry? You know, we want to equip someone, we want to get someone there, but why don't they want to? But the truth is the entire atmosphere that might have been created has encouraged or discouraged people away from what they see as the primary work of the ministry that happens on that stage that we reserve for just a few. Now, there's some obviously really positive things to that stage and the ability to equip a lot of people at once, and there's all those different benefits, and I'm not saying get rid of it. You know, there's times that I want to, if I'm being honest, you know, because I believe in the people of God so much. Like I believe in the person who's sitting in the third row from the back on the left side. Like I believe, you know, and there's times when I will go before service and I will pray over chairs. That is something that I've done you know, all throughout being a pastor. Is I'll go and pray over chairs, and I'll just believe that God wants to do something in whoever sits in this chair's life today, right? And it's kind of exciting because then during service you kind of watch that chair and you're like, oh, that's who sat in it, you know, and then you get to see like what maybe God's doing. But you know, but oftentimes like, man, it's this entire environment and structure and model that we've created that we call church that kind of breeds this comparison and this feelings of inadequacy in the guy or the girl that's in the third row from the back on the left side. And they feel like their role as a Christian is to come, watch, give, and then go, you know, right. and that's it. And what if there's more, but we've only compartmentalized what really happens in ministry to, I don't know, some select few that have the position.
Yeah. I had a pastor once tell me that the fruit that comes from obedience isn't dependent on if God shows up. It's dependent on if you show up. God will work. You have to let him. God will show up. God will move. You have to remove the expectation from what you think the results will look like in order to be aware. And that's something that I pray. And as we kind of wrap up, I just want like to end in an encouraging way too, you know, not just say like, you know, we all have voices, blah, blah, blah. It's great and it's true. And I'm sure everyone deals with it, but how have you seen, in short, the fruit of the obedience in your life? Like, what has God taken you to and through? And what are some, maybe just like a quick way that people can prioritize obeying God and kind of processing through those voices?
I've shared this story in a message before, but you know, when I was a pastor early on, I was a youth pastor and young adults pastor, and my wife and I, we ended up having sex before we were married, and we ended up getting pregnant. And it was so close to our actual wedding date that that we got married and things like that. We didn't find out she was pregnant until the morning of our wedding. Like literally, like it was like that close to it. And so, yeah, it was
that eliminated all the wedding day nerves.
So, well, or something. And so, you know, and so we went on our honeymoon and we waited a while, and then we started to announce, okay, she's pregnant, she's starting to show kind of deal. And when people started to assume that it was a honeymoon baby, we didn't necessarily disagree. And really what it came down to was I was motivated by the voice that made me want to preserve the image that I had. You know, and also the image that I knew my wife had, you know, and so I was trying to preserve all these images at the expense of obedience. Ultimately, I couldn't take it anymore, and I was driven to be obedient. I was called out in some ways. I was confronted, and I had a decision to make, and I decided. I'm grateful that I decided this time. I'm not happy that it took me as long as it did, but once I chose obedience, it wasn't easy. It was hard. There were some very serious consequences. I resigned, I stepped out of a job, and so here I am, new baby, no job. That's crazy, right? Like there's a bunch of things going on. You know, ministry was so much of my identity at the time, right? And that's something I had to learn through. But what I will say is that difficult step of obedience made me hunger for steps of obedience. And what I mean by that is when you start to be obedient And even when it's tough, even when it's hard, but you see how faithful God is in it, when you see how much it's true that God actually does look to and fro throughout the whole earth to stand strong on someone whose heart is loyal to him and is going to say, I'm going to stick with you, even if the consequences don't line up and seem sensible, I'm still going to stay with Mary. And we're going to raise baby Jesus together. Like even when you're like, I'm still going to confess my sin, and I'm going to step away from so much that is all that I know in my whole community, my whole relationship, and try to figure out and navigate what this is. Even when it means that you're going to move out and have to pay more rent, but you're going to do things God's way. You fill in the blank, whatever scenario it is. When you start to see how faithful God is, it makes you hungry for more steps of obedience, because you start to say, I don't want to be dependent. That's really what it comes down to, right? It's control, right? Like if I can just keep going and fulfilling what I think is the expectations of everybody else, or responding to what I think everybody else is thinking about me, or what people are going to think about me, or if I keep trying to be obedient to, the masses and the public opinion, and also my opinions and my desires, instead of obedience to the voice of God, that, when you do take the step on the other side and you say, I am going to be obedient to the voice of God, and you see what God does, man, you look at life differently. You're motivated towards it because you're like, what's he going to do next? And you see this clearly when you go to like the scary places on the mission field. You know what I'm talking about? You ever talk to a missionary that is like, in a really hard place to be a missionary, and they will tell you, like, they're excited to put themselves in what sounds like dangerous and risky positions, financially, provisionally, safety, right? They will do it because they've seen God show up, and they're excited for the next time he will. And man, if you're listening to this and you're wondering, should I step out and be obedient to the voice of God? Should I give more, authority to the voice of God in your life? Let me tell you, if you do once, you will want to again, because you will see the faithfulness of God in your life. And it might take a long time for you to see the faithfulness. Oftentimes it might even take years or decades afterwards. But let me tell you, when you are faithful to what God is calling you to do, then you experience what Jesus describes as a life more abundant. And I know that Anthony wants that for you. I want that for you. And so I implore you, exhort you, be sensitive to the voice of God more so than the voice of what other people think.
That's great. I think I appreciated your message a ton, and I'm sure I've heard from 2 or 3 high schoolers that sat in the service that were like, that was great, as well as middle school leaders saying, we got to talk about this with high schoolers more too. So we appreciate you and everything you do, and I think that's probably a wrap on this pod, huh?
All right, we'll see you next time on Digging Deeper.
We're going to get to Magic Edit right now.
Oh, man.
See you guys next time.